welcome to JCON 1, Stream 1. And my Airhacks FM podcast is only famous because I did an episode with Markus Kett about MicroStream, and that's why it's so popular. Other things are not that exciting on my podcast. Okay, now welcome back at the conference. And what I did last year, there was a keynote I delivered, and I tried to take a look what I did, and I was not really satisfied. So I think, okay, this time I will create a little bit more slides to have more structure and a little bit more coding, because I got another session afterwards with just coding. So there will be a balance. You can ask me questions at any time, so feel free to use the chat, yeah, it should be fun. So online conferences should be at least fun and more interactive than usual conferences. Okay, now. Keynote, what should happen in 2021? Why should? Because who knows what will happen, right? So this is just my observations, and what should happen means what I think it is logical. And in software industry, I would say a lot is also fashion. So let's see what happens, but what should happen. And this time, Java backends and web frontend, so both. So I really like still Java. I actually really enjoy it more and more, and the upcoming JDK releases are getting even more exciting. So fun time for Java developers. And as a Java developer, it's also a good time to start with web, because you will see in an hour that actually this modern JavaScript is almost like Java, or is identical to Java. And so there is a blog and the very famous Airhacks FM. So thank you, Robert, to introducing me. And my blog is probably also interesting. It's like a notepad. And if you have any questions left, see you at Airhacks TV, first Monday of the month. Just ask whatever you like, and I try to answer that. Okay, now to understand the future, we should look at the history. And so the brief history of web frontends. So what I observed is everything started with fat clients, but they were not exactly Swing, JavaFX, and applets. They were more like Power Builder fat clients, and I never created something like Power Builder or Microsoft Access app, but what I know is that the users and the developers were really happy with that what happened. But regardless the happiness, what we did to them, we introduced ultra thin clients and just HTML only. There was like the thin client, ultra thin client, and the idea is there should be nothing, no logic on the client. The entire logic has to be on the server. So, and then we got, of course, rich client, which was exactly the opposite. We said, okay, now we need no more interactivity. And by the way, the point 2 was not exactly true. I was in project back then where we are not allowed to use officially JavaScript, but my clients really wanted to have mice over effects. And this was only possible back then with JavaScript, not CSS was not available. So we had unofficially used no JavaScript. So I always use JavaScript, but I never admit it, because back then, if you admit JavaScript, people will call you crazy. It's like, why are you doing JavaScript? Like you are not, capable to learn something more, useful. Then rich clients, they were basically Swing, JavaFX, and WebStart. This is what happened, and they were fighting, against HTML5. And from my perspective, HTML5 was huge misunderstanding, because people thought, this is like the replacement. Or by the way, rich client also forgot, of course, Flash and everything around Flash, right? And the HTML5 was understood like a replacement of Flash, which was not at all. So basically, HTML5 was like more semantic web than Flash. But some around surrounding technologies like CSS3, for instance, were really interesting. So this was HTML5, and Web 2.0 even worse. So what Web 2.0 means is actually user-generated content, like weblogs and stuff like that. And people back then believed this is like fisheye effects on the web. So this was the story behind that. So then we got the spaghetti era, I would say, like jQuery, Backbone, and stuff like that. It's like a glue between backend and frontend. XHR was huge. There were even Ajax conferences. So I always ask myself what they're talking about, because the Ajax conference, the entire 2 days, talking about XHR, about one single 3 JavaScript functions, but there were conferences about that. And then we got web standards. But these web standards were not this what we understand now under web standards. Is more like we should evolve the web again and use more all the goodness from web. And then it was still not usable. as you remember, probably you needed patterns for modules in JavaScript. So to have your namespace, you needed a pattern like self-invoked functions, which was actually everything was fixed with ES 2015. This is the modern JavaScript, and this modern JavaScript is actually what we have right now, and it really looks like Java. And of course, this was not just JavaScript. We got immediately, NPM. Before NPM, we got the Grunt and Broccoli and thousands different build frameworks, to transpile and compile and recompile. And at the end of the day, we got some JavaScript running in the browser. So point A, even worse. Now we have dependency injection in browser and code generation in browser. This is like an application server in a browser, and some projects are happy with it. And the point 9, I think this is now reality right now. We have just evergreen browsers, and all the browsers are compatible. Okay, now what we have in Frontends, I mean, all the frameworks were replaced by standards. I don't think we need jQuery anymore. So this is like, document selector document query. Is this what we got? Frameworks become less relevant. So I don't think you don't need them, but I don't think they will gain on popularity. They become less and less relevant. This is actually the future. What I can predict that actually 2021 and 2022, you will think twice whether you really need a framework or not. This is actually the prediction. The web components are available everywhere. So you can use frameworks to create web components, or you can create them without frameworks. The only question is whether you would like to have a framework or not. CSS layout is fixed, which is actually great news for Java developers. It works more or less like Swing 20 years ago. The layout, we got grid and flex layout, which are really powerful. So all the CSS hacks and all the proprietary grid frameworks are no more necessary. So Bootstrap and Foundation, for instance, no more needed. So compatibility is actually a coolness feature right now. So back then, every browser vendor tried to break the internet, and be the dominant browser. Right now, all the vendors are actually working together to provide better user experience, and no one tries to break the internet anymore, which is a huge difference to even 5 years ago. So JavaScript becomes very like Java, and what's also happened is right now, if you remember JavaFX, it actually is still there. This is a community project, but it is a really interesting option for building not desktop PC apps, but because you can do this just very easily with web, but you can ship actually iOS and Android apps in the App Store. As Java developers, is really an interesting option. So what we had in Java. So in Java, this is actually how I started is some Java web server, and it's actually a great thing to deliver a keynote because I did some research. I always thought that Jigsaw was Apache project. It is not. So Jigsaw is actually W3C servlet engine, which I also evaluated back then. And this is how everything started. So Java on the backend. This was actually the beginnings. And shortly after, I would say 1 to 2 years later, we got 22, I would say at least 50 different application servers, and they were completely impossible to understand what's going on. Actually, very parallel to the Java development, to the front-end development, the same story. There are more and more frameworks, and now everything condensed to standards back then. Then was I remember there were some people just laughed, Tomcat, and they referred Tomcat is the lightweight solution and J2E is heavyweight solution. No one actually said what it actually means, because what I saw in projects more and more, like there were wars, and I remember something was 50, and I think there were 500 megs. I tried to find it in my mailbox because a client in Switzerland asked me, can you help us? We have like 500 meg wars. And it turned out that the 500 meg wars were deployed to like 5 to 10 megs Tomcat. So it means, the application was larger than the infrastructure, but they still referred to as lightweight, right? Then in some project, what I also saw was even funnier. There were projects where I counted there were more XML than Java code, which is also funny. And in such a project, why they did it was interesting. They did it because if they changed XML, they didn't have to retest the code, which was somehow a good strategy. Because then what I suggested in this particular project, you could use do some research, funny stuff. Jelly is called Jelly. Jelly is an XML programming language where you can actually program stuff in XML. Maven 1 was based on Jelly. So it's okay, then we can do everything in XML. So it would be funnier. So then came Java 5 with annotations, and this was a complete in a complete different direction. So with that, all XML is gone. Convention of the configuration defined by Rails, configuration by exception was stolen by some microsystems. The idea was stolen, and they reframed the name configuration by exception. And what it meant is this was actually what I really started to like, the whole server-side Java, because we could delete all the XML craziness, and what we got is just Java's interface. The interface was deleted. It was 0.7. This were the Java 6 interface were optional, and add inject came from Spring. So Rod Johnson donated add inject to Java 6 and actually changed the direction. And then, then the microservice era happened with thin wars and kilobyte wars. And back then, 7 years ago, we said, okay, shared deployments are no more viable. No one needs them because you don't save anything. So, so we walk away from that. And now Oracle was late, as you probably know. And then we got, MicroProfile. And why we got MicroProfile is because now to make more Oracle move a little bit. And at the beginning, pretty boring. So MicroProfile was actually nothing exciting, subset of Java EE. So from my perspective, absolutely unusable, the first version. And now what MicroProfile is, I would say MicroProfile implements the CNCF stuff, which is needed for running applications, not only on the clouds, on Docker or on Kubernetes. Like, for instance, open metrics, open tracing, and stuff like that. So, what we got right now is a new wave, new generation of micro runtimes, and there are lots of them, which use a standard API. Why standard API? Because we don't like, to do the same mistake as in point 2, that we get, 50 different Java runtimes, which has nothing in common, because now we would get, 50 different Java runtimes, which actually compete with 100 Node.js runtimes, which makes everything even worse. So, and then what we also had is we always had for 20 years a standard Java APIs. Actually, one of the first was JDBC. The next one was JNDI from Novell, so that we can actually abstract from LDAP and NDS. Then we got JMS, Java Message Service, and servlets, and they are still available, still great. And I would say these were one of the great successes of Java. Why Java is so popular? Because huge companies, insurances, banks actually said, okay, Java is something stable, so now invest in the ecosystem, and this is how Java happened. I would say if it will look like at point 2 that we got 50 competing vendors without any chance to make something portable, the entire Java stuff will die. And I think the secret source of Java is why, because we have APIs, and I think the APIs is what we APIs also see it in the front ends. Is something which become more and more important in future as well, because browser APIs, right? I use Fetch. I don't have, to download 3 JavaScript libraries to talk to the backend, for instance, which was necessary a few years ago. If any questions, feel free to ask, and the JCON moderators will help me, to reread the questions. Okay, now, so what it means is what this all means, right? How it looks like from the code perspective. So I will have to code a little bit, otherwise the keynotes are too boring. So now, this is, by the way, what I forgot to show you. Whatever I do, I would check into GitHub and then Airhacks. Actually, the wonderful slides are already checked in. And what I also found is this is the very famous Jigsaw server, which is still there. So actually, I wanted to download and play with it. This was the first servlet engine, or the first. Tomcat was, I would say, on the timeline almost the same timeline. And what I mentioned is, for instance, why not one applications per server domain? One of the good stuff is to write a blog because there is a date, And if there's a date, I know when I wrote it. This is 2013, so 7 years ago. Probably I was challenged by several clients about shared deployments. Okay, we don't need them anymore. Just put everything on the server. So we have one-to-one relation. Then we get a lot of deployment models, but what actually happened is over the last 2 years, we got smaller and smaller deployables, thin wars, show in a second, then hollow jars, which basically more or less died because, as you probably know, Thorntail is game over, so there is no more Thorntail, and they coined, I think, the term hollow jar, which meant we get small runtime with a war which was separated. And then what we get is something like skim jar. There's no name for it, so I invented the name. This is what Quarkus and Helidon are doing. So like to have 500K business logic, which refers to infrastructure, is not a fetch jar. And fetch jar and Uber jar became actually pointless because they don't like to to copy 20, 30, 50 megabyte of jar over and over again to the cloud. And FatWar is Jenkins. So Jenkins is everything in a war. And of course, executable image with Graal. Exactly. So now, how this looks like, a little bit of code. So first, let's start with JCON, Jakarta Con. So JKCon. So what I'm doing right now, I opened this with, I created a project, Maven, and I would like just to open and show you how it looks like. So this is not exactly a feature. It is actually something which is still viable. So you have one dependency to all, the boring Java APIs. And I say boring is good. And the dependency to the cloud native APIs is MicroProfile. So this is how all my projects looks, as all my server projects looks right now. And this is just, the service. Just ignore the system tests. And what we get is we get, some business logic. Like here we have ping resource, which is JAXRS, and which with injected message, and the injection works with cloud native means. What it means is I can just override that. So how to launch that? So how the runtime looks like. And for that, I would like to show you an old runtime and to explain you how it works very briefly. And I would like, so now I installed the still fresh, but it's one of the oldest, is Glassfish reference implementation, Payara. Should start, hopefully, if there is no conflicts with screen sharing, but it is not, thankfully. And what I can do is I could try, to build that first and to show you what happens. So now it's built, and on the target, you will find hopefully a war. This is the deployable. And the deployable is, let's say, it's 4K. So I would call it thin war, small war, tiny war, whatever war, but it's a small one, 4K. Why it's so small? Because, the Payara is larger. Is it huge? Not exactly huge, but larger. So let's see how big this thing is. I would like to start the JVisual VM. Very good. And see how big the Glassfish actually is. So, and this is really unfair because it already runs with -XMX 512. So there is no pressure for the JVM, to minimize the memory consumption, but perform GC, and we see, okay, there's around 70 megs. So this is what the heap size, and of course, everything from outside is larger. I would assume, I don't know, 100 to 150 megs. This RSS is larger than that, but to give you an impression what it is. So, and how to deploy the thing? Yeah, you will have actually basically, you will have to copy a war to the server. So just do this and see whether it works. So this is now copied. And then with curl, I think localhost, what was it, 8080, JKCon, resources, and ping. And yeah, it works. So this was the entire deployment of, this is not a future, this is like the present. Okay. So now what I promise you, there are lots of small frameworks which are around, MicroProfile. So how they look like. So first, I will have to kill this one. And I would like to kill all my Java, so better. Then let's do something different. So what we can do, JCON heli. Looks strange, but go with JHeli. Okay. Very good in it. I was too fast. So what I would like to do is, this is actually an interesting story in a second. So I would like to create a MicroProfile project, which is bare and with everything. Yeah, and actually, yes, why not? Just go ahead. So, and what is this? This is a similar project. It uses similar libraries, but it's a very fresh one. And I will just switch to here and open it with an editor. So now, if I open that and take a look at the source code, you will see it is actually identical, right? So I use ping, this is greet, it was generated, and I don't like how it is written. So, but what we could do is right now is just to steal a little bit of my browser and show you something, which is the new normal, actually. So I would like to make it smaller. So and see whether it works. Localhost 8080, and I think it was greet. Very good. Hello world, as you can see, right? So now what I could do now, I can just change that to hello JCON and reload that. And it doesn't work. No, it works. I thought it doesn't because it's a presentation. Usually it always works, but it's presentation. So of course, if we say JCON 1, it also should work. Okay. And so what interesting is, it's actually exactly the same API, Jakarta E with MicroProfile. And take a look at the POM. What it is Helidon, but it comes with here MicroProfile. So what it means is I could actually take an old Glassfish application, 10 years old, and put it in a modern runtime. Now, what's the difference from the size perspective? So just go here. So we have now the Helidon, and this is not this is development modus. Unfair development mode, it takes more space, but what do you already see? It is 47, so it is 16 megs. So it is a fraction of the size of the server. As I said, this is unfair because it runs now in development mode, and the development mode is funny. So it works good, but it works if we take a look at the terminal here. So yeah. So if I change here something, let's say no JCON 1, 2. So it immediately recognizes and reloads the entire server. So there is no hot reloading. It just got completely rebuilt from scratch, which is a good thing. No tricks. Okay, this thing is called Helidon. It is open source and it is. I would say it is older than Quarkus actually. But similar to Quarkus, this is Helidon, and you have two choices. You can run Helidon MP or Helidon SE. So I choose this because this is now the API which I'm familiar with, and this is no difference to Whitefly and PyRF. Funny fact, I was invited to another conference, and what I recognized that I actually delivered a talk 8 years ago at that conference with the title like, future is not evenly distributed yet or something like that. And I wrote some code. And what I did, I picked the code and redeployed it on modern runtimes almost without any change. Actually, without any change. So it was I just simplified the build process. So it is viable. So I think what the future is not like you are introducing esoteric frameworks because you can. What's really interesting for business and for projects is to pick the old familiar APIs and build something interesting around these APIs and replace the runtime with something new. Okay. Now, this was Helidon. So what about Quarkus? So if we, this was the POC, we could do the same with Quarkus. And for that purpose, I would like to launch a Quarkus project to show you the difference. And project group, now we can go with, now go Airhacks and JCON. This is better. And yes, I would like to have the everything give me, okay. And then, okay, perfect. Now it created JCON. Now, if we open that, what we will see is hopefully something familiar. This is a quick starter from complete different framework. As you can see, exactly the same programming API as Quarkus. So probably there are other sessions about Quarkus at this conference. And the POM is similar. I mean, it is not as easy as Java E. It cannot be because it's like, the skim jar, not a fetch jar, rather than it generates, it already separates the infrastructure from the business logic. But let's start. The thing is complete different concept, and just and start the API. Wait a sec. So this is Maven compile, yeah, Quarkus dev, and cool thing. Watch this. We have port conflicts. What I can do actually with Helidon, I can say port 8081. And in running system, it changes the port, and now I should be able to run Quarkus. So Maven compile Quarkus dev. Now it started, and see what happens here. So if I cannot, if I try to reload, there is nothing, but it should be under 8081. Is it? I don't know. But 80 greetings. There should be, what was it? Let's see. There should be Quarkus running. So do it again, kill Java, everything down, and run it again, and there should be a Quarkus running on that port. Curl localhost.
I guess it should be hello. The endpoint was named hello, I guess.
Yeah, you are right. So I thought, yeah, perfect. So this is, when the moderator is more know than the speaker, know more than the speaker. Thank you. And so now it works with Quarkus. What's interesting part is if I just kill that again, build it again. A little bit slow, my machine. And now what you see is that the runner is 240K. This is the separation, and in lib, there are all the jars, which are the infrastructure. And something like this is already a future, because this is what all the application servers did, and all the new frameworks are doing as well. Now let's take a look at the Helidon, and this is the POC, and this is target. And oh, it was not built, so build this. And then you will see a similar story. They also separate, there's complete different libraries and different approaches, but they separate that. So, and then hopefully, so we have them. So test is broken, so okay. But I really would like to show you this. This is now, of course, the agile trick. Skip tests. I'm wrong directory. Moderator, what's up with you? You see in target. So I'll just do it again. And now it should work. So I was in complete wrong directory. Not only the tests were okay, but and now I can show you what it is. So there is ls minus. So and see in the case of Helidon, there is a 6K, and all the libraries are here. If we would, for instance, create the Docker image, you will see in both cases, actually in all cases of all runtimes, now the layering, like we get now the application layer and the infrastructure, which makes sense because Docker does it for you. If you push something in the cloud, in this particular case, we will push, in Helidon case, 6K, in the Quarkus case, 200 kilobytes, and the infrastructure will be pushed once per release of the runtime to the cloud. Okay, these were the two modern releases. So now, so the Quarkus memory consumption is similar to Helidon. You can start both with, I would say, 16 megs of RAM, Hello World application. So actually, both are smaller than empty Tomcat. Okay, now, what else? So what some fallacies from them, what I see in projects, what we are assuming, like now let's mix, the Java and Frontends together, all the fallacies. So what I hear a lot, vanilla web components are not productive, you need a framework. And I say, why? And the answer is because we need it. So, okay, then let's try without. And so far, people were happy. Then you always need, NPM minifications, uglifications, transpilations, and whatever appellations to implement, a simple application, which is actually not true. And even code generation. So there are command line interface, we generate code because it becomes too hard, which reminds me really on early Java days with Xdocket and code generators we had back then. Then what I also see a lot, statements like public clouds are cheaper than on-premise infrastructure. They can be, but usually they are not. They can be more predictable, more secure, whatever, but cheap, and I don't think so. And also point 4, so Kubernetes is great, but there is not only Kubernetes. So I see, a project which are perfectly happy without Kubernetes, and they're running on Docker or even on bare metal. You can have, great results. You don't always need Kubernetes and Docker. Then number 5 is critical. So I saw a project we try to do everything with function as a service, and this is of course crazy, because if you try to do that, you will get like distributed command pattern, where usually I would get one class with 5 methods. If you do it in the function way, you would get for every method of the class one function distributed somewhere. And we had it already in Java, I would say 15 years ago. So command pattern was a big deal. But it is really hard to implement. And so what I also hear now, Java on the server is dead. So for rendering, I don't think so. For instance, what I'm still convinced is, so in JavaScript is very popular, the pre-render pages on the server. We could actually do it as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if, Jakarta MVC or even servlets or even JSPs without, the just as template, without the business or without the logic templates inside, could be become more popular, because it's really convenient to pre-generate some code on the server and ship pre-generated HTML JavaScript with web components to the browser. Sometimes it's really a good workaround or even best practice. Then what I also hear is API stability doesn't matter. We don't need APIs, or sometimes you heard that the APIs are invented in ivory tower. We don't need them. We just rely on the frameworks. What I saw more and more, like larger projects don't like that, or clients, because if you don't have API, every minor change of the framework implies migrations, which are not acceptable in larger projects, but are perfectly fine for startups, of course. And what I also hear, Java, okay, Java is fast, but who cares? We don't need throughput and performance. We just scale, in the clouds. Sometimes it is true for projects which do not matter a lot. This is true. But it is always better, to have one node with better performance than 10 nodes with less performance. It's easier to program. It's more convenient, and with more convenience, you get more productivity. This can come back, and also, the obsession with memory. So I always show you all the memories upfront that this Helidon and Quarkus are actually tiny. Just because I get the questions all the time, and I ask them, do you have really problem with memory? No, but it's expensive. So you measured actually how expensive it is, and sometimes I get an answer, and sometimes I don't. So fact is, what's really nice, see in a second, is we will get GraalVM, and with GraalVM can save the memory, but the application could get 10% slower. So what will happen, I think, learn fundamental once, apply everywhere. I think this is what I see more and more what developers really like. So I think the older you are, less you become excited about a shiny framework on the horizon, because you saw so many frameworks go away. So okay, is it really necessary to spend time with the frameworks, which looks exactly like the framework 10 years ago with different names? And so for me, API stability is very important. What we already saw is that Helidon and Quarkus and Payara, Whitefly, OpenLiberty, and Piranha Cloud, a great runtime, Cumulus, all these libraries, you can take one app and run this without any modification on all the runtimes. And where they compete is with the developer experience, memory, and performance. And I think fatigue with esoterics. So I remember, 5 years ago, there was a huge boost in reactive programming, and I never got to the point. I was like, why we need reactive programming when there is nothing reactive, right? But for instance, now we got, Kafka, we get some reactive data sources. Now it's time, to use reactive programming, because it is just natural. 5 years ago, it was just crazy. I completely ignored the entire reactive trend and was really happy with the decision. I was in project who asked me, we did everything reactive and no one knows what happens, because it's really hard to debug the entire thing. I would say write less code is very important. So my code reviews and projects, I delete more code than I write, and it's a good thing. And boring is good. So the new boring means if you take old APIs, like for instance GMS, right? So recently in the famous AirHacksFM podcast, right, there was an interview with Microsoft, and they actually recently provided GMS 2.0 support for from Azure Service Bus. So you can actually use your old GMS API to push messages to the cloud. So actually a great idea. Okay, so in backends, so GraalVM is a big deal, I would say. So what GraalVM is able to do, so you probably saw already on the conference, that you can take a Java bytecode and translate it to native image, and you will get something like C or Go executable image. But it's more than that. With GraalVM, what you can do is actually you can embed a programming language like JavaScript, very compatible runtime, and interact with JavaScript back and forth. It's something like Nashorn on steroids, for instance, or Python or R. So I did some JavaScript programming already in GraalVM, and it works really great. And if you like, you can actually compile both Java with JavaScript to native image, but you don't have to. Then CLI and functions and serverless, big deal as well. Actually, so what I did here, this Helidon, this is Java. So also this is a native image. This is a compiled Java application to native image, so you can download as a executable image from the Helidon site, and it generates the project for you. A great idea actually, and it was hidden. I had a chat with Dimitris. I think he's also at the conference. Like, hey, look, is it actually Java? Yes, and then offer us Java as well. But it looks like Go, but it's actually Java. So what I think is we will see more and more command line interfaces with Java. I also created some utilities with Java because I'm Java developer. It's very easy for me. And with the cross compilation, it makes absolute sense because I get something, I put something in the path and it immediately works. So about that. So then what we also get is event-driven runtimes might make reactive programming viable. So if you have Kafka, it makes absolute sense to use reactive programming. So then, okay, then I will just react to the events to do something with it, for instance, right? Or WebSockets. But if you have HTTP, this is questionable whether it makes sense to start with reactive programming. So we have clear separation between runtime and business code. Otherwise, we won't get any images and layers. So, and what I also observe is, now I said, JavaScript becomes like Java. What is also true, Java becomes like JavaScript. What we already got is text blocks, very similar to JavaScript. You will see it in 10 minutes in my next session, 20 minutes. Lambdas in both var. This is a little bit confusing because the var in JavaScript is almost deprecated and we got it in Java. So this Java var is like let in JavaScript land. And the structuring, we will in one point get it in Java, which is available in JavaScript, which is really, really a nice feature. And what I also will see, competition already happens right now. So for instance, what I showed you today, just because it showed you Payara, Quarkus, and Helidon, and not the others. If you take a look at Piranha Cloud, also a mini runtime, just a servlet runtime, also very, very small. Already they plan support Jakarta A9, for instance. And so Helidon versus Quarkus, if you take a look, complete different approaches. Quarkus ships with a Maven plugin, which generates the code. Helidon has a command line interface. Helidon tries to be as standard compatible as possible. Quarkus are more pragmatic and optimized for GraalVM, but still I can now pick my old application and run on any of them. Then Cumulus, a huge server, I think it's from Slovenia. And yeah, then we have, then we get faster cadence with CNCF. What is CNCF? Cloud Native Foundation. It means, CNCF forces us to have a faster cadence with MicroProfile. And we focus more on developer joy, developer experience, productivity, and the last one is huge. Observability matters. So what it means, observability matters. It means right now it's not very fashionable to think about monitorable services, but I think it is very, very important that if you push something to the cloud, that you know what this thing is doing. So not only know that the method was called, so what happens inside. So we will spend more time with metrics, counters, gauges, and stuff like that. And in the front ends, I think we'll get more and more vanilla web components, which already happens. So SpaceX ships with vanilla web components. There are components like from ENG, Lions web components, Adobe Spectrum web components. And what I think also, so more and more framework features will move to the browser APIs. So it's no more necessary, to have framework to deliver an app. Browsers get more desktop features. We will get less browsers, which are actually bad, but this will lead to more compatibility, which is good. And AR, VR, I mean, it's not like a killer feature, but I think we know with the LiDAR built in, and who knows, with the glasses, this could be a thing again in a few years. And right now you can experiment with it in web with, for instance, main 3JS, and I think Frame.js, 3JS and Frame. And infrastructural JavaScript frameworks are nice to have, but what I think what will happen is we will get more libraries in JavaScript. Like, I can pick, 3DS, or I can pick Moment.js, or I can pick web components libraries installed on infrastructural framework. So that's all right on time. We have 3 minutes to go. If you like, come December to my workshops. Okay, then thank you.